So I've made my cakes, and I've made a plain sponge and a chocolate. Just a reminder, the plain sponge, I used 3 eggs, so every egg is 50 grams of self-raising flour, caster sugar, baking butter. So I used 3 eggs, 150, 150, 150. Every egg is a quarter of a spoon of baking powder, so 3/4 of a spoon of baking powder, a little splash of milk. I did a chocolate sponge, so again 3 eggs, 150 grams of caster sugar, 150 grams of baking butter, 120 self-raising flour, up to 150 by adding 30 grams of cocoa powder, 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder, and a little splash of milk. So what I thought I would do is, I've heated up some cream in the microwave. And if you're making a chocolate ganache for the top of the cake, it's really easy and it gives it a lovely glossy coating of chocolate. So what you need is exactly the same measurements of dark chocolate and cream. All you do is the heat of the cream and the heat of the bowl, you stir them together. Now, ways that people go wrong with this is that they try to put the ganache under the sponge too quickly. So while the ganache is still too hot, people try to put it on top of the sponge. This is where it runs all over the place and you don't get that lovely glossy finish. Sometimes you need to just heat it up a tiny bit more. That might be the case with mine today. You can do this by very carefully doing it in the microwave or doing it over water and suspended over a pan like a bain-marie. So my chocolate's melting there, but I think I've lost a little bit of temperature, so I'm just going to heat it up for 20 seconds. So make sure you keep an eye on the chocolate in the microwave, cream and the chocolate in the microwave, you don't want to overcook it. So 2 minutes. Right, there we go. So I'm stirring it, and the chocolate's still lumpy. Coming out of the microwave, there's still lumps of chocolate in there, so you just have to be really patient and keep stirring so the heat of the cream and the heat of the bowl melt all of those lumps of chocolate. It's starting to look lovely and glossy. It's starting to have very few lumps. Again, just a little bit more stir. Right, so I've got no lumps of chocolate, it's just a smooth ganache. So I'm just going to put it to one side to allow that temperature to reduce down again. It'll only take a couple of minutes and we'll come back to that. Meanwhile, for the sponge, I thought we might try a milk icing top using 2 different colours so that you can pattern it. Now, the biggest mistake that people make when using icing sugar with milk or with water is that they add too much liquid. So you really need to be controlled when you're adding your liquid. So to this, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of milk. I'm going to stir it. And you think it's really, really dry, but you'd be surprised if you just stir it for an extra few seconds, you realise that you're not going to need much milk adding to that mixture to make it runny. So I'm going to add 1 more teaspoon. I'm trying to use the same equipment so I'm not creating loads of dirty dishes. So 1 more teaspoon of milk. I'm going to stir this round until I've got quite a smooth consistency. So you can see that it's dropping consistency. I don't want it much thinner than that. So when I put it on top of the cake, it's going to spread around. Now to that, if you needed more, all you would do is add another spoon or spoon and a half of icing sugar, and I'm going to, again, really controlled, I'm going to add about 1.5 teaspoons of milk to that. It's always better to start with a little bit and add to it, because otherwise if you have loads of milk added and it's really sloppy, you're going to need lots and lots of icing sugar to level it out. So there we go, dead easy, adding some more icing sugar, a little bit more milk, and it's giving me a bigger quantity. Nice and smooth, nice and glossy. Just going to go back to my ganache, give it a little stir. Obviously you would normally be making one or the other, so you don't need to go between the two. So again, still nice and runny, almost ready to put on the top of my cake. Right, to my other bowl, I'm going to do another icing. This time I'm not going to make as much, and I'm going to add some dye. So I've got food coloring. First one I grabbed out of the cupboard is purple. Only need a tiny little bit of food dye for your 2 dips. I'll do it. I'll make it a little bit darker than I normally would so that it shows up on camera. I clean it off the knife by just dipping it into the sugar. It tends to get all of the colour off the knife. I'm using colour gels. You can use colour powder, or you could use liquid. So I put my colour in first, and then I'm going to add the milk, exactly the same as the last time. I'm going to put around about 1.5 teaspoons of milk in, and then add if needed. Add a little bit more sugar just to thicken it up slightly. Try not to make a mess. I'm happy with that for the moment. I might add a tiny bit of milk. No, I'll probably leave it like that. So I'm happy with that. Just make some space. I'm going to go back to my ganache. All I'm going to do with the ganache is put it onto the cake. I'm going to tip the cake and spread it about as evenly as I can. I'm going to use a spatula. So the idea is you touch it as little as possible. You're going to pour it quite central in the cake. Just going to encourage it to spread a little bit, but then moving the plate, I'm going to help it go to the corners. You can melt white chocolate and do similar techniques to what we're going to do with the icing, or you can just do it so that it drizzles down the sides of the cake. As it settles, it gets a smoother top, so it will sink slightly and it'll start to run down the edges. You can just see it running down the edges on that side. It looks a little bit spreaded on the top, but as it rests, it'll start to really smooth out. But it gives a lovely shiny finish. The light's not very good in the kitchen today. So a lovely shiny chocolate finish. And to that, you could, in fact, let me see if I've got some. fridge, so you could, while it's still wet, you could add, I've got white and milk chocolate chunks here. So you could take a bit of time, obviously, and decorate it nicely if you want. I'm going for the rustic look. But the thing to remember with ganache is equal quantities of cream and dark chocolate, and don't overheat your cream. Leave it to cool down to room temperature so that it doesn't run all over, it stays on the top of the cake. Just give my hands a little rub. So, my other cake. Now this is a technique that makes the cake look really well finished. So I'm going to do it on a plain sponge. I've got white milk icing, fairly runny. I'm going to spread that over the top. And I've also got quite a vibrant purple that I'm going to put into a piping bag. So the easiest way to put something into a piping bag is to have a cup or a glass. Put your piping bag, hold over the top. It means that you don't need to hold it with your hand. You can put all of the icing in with the support of a mug or a glass. I've used a glass today so you can see what I was doing. Sometimes I just use a mug with it not being as high. So I've got quite a vivid purple here. You don't need a lot of the colour for the design that I'm doing. But obviously you can experiment. It's just a starting point. So there's my bag. If you haven't got an icing bag, if I run out, I use a freezer bag and I just do it on the diagonal. So there's my icing bag ready. I'm going to put my, just get a knife. I'm going to put the white icing on the top. And again, I'm looking for it to naturally flow down the edges. It's quite nice when it starts to just drizzle down the edges slightly. And if you're not doing specific decoration on the sides, it's quite nice to just let it finish quite rustic. I've left it quite thick so that it won't take as long to set. Again, I'm just going to help the icing spread out, and then it will naturally move about on the top of the cake. So just help it to the edges. Once you've had a couple of practices of this, you can start doing a range of designs. All good stuff. So all I've done is cover the top, so I've got a plain white canvas. I'm then going to do a very, very small hole in the icing bag. Really, really small, because all I'm going to do is fine lines, fine straight lines across the cake. So I'm just going backwards and forwards. So one way, I'm going to turn it and do exactly the same as the other way. So that's all I've done. Now, taking a cocktail stick or a skewer, all I'm going to do is in between those squares, I'm just going to run the skewer all the way down. So from one end, without lifting it up, all I'm going to do is drag it. I think I might try every other one. And then I'm going to go back, opposite direction. in the squares that I haven't done yet. Now you could leave it like that, which is quite effective. I'm just going to be a little bit brave and also try going opposite direction. So that way, then I'm going to drag it back and go the other way. So looking at that, it gives you a really lovely finish to a cake, and it's not that difficult to get some really lovely finishes. So I've used a milk icing, so it's not as harsh. Also nice if you add custard when you're serving it, because it's got more of a creamy finish rather than the harsh sugar of the icing sugar and water. But really nice to get different patterns, and you can do another way to do it is doing the white, and then if you put spots and drag the skewer or cocktail stick through it, it makes love heart shapes if you do dots on it. So there's loads and loads of patterns you can create really, really quickly. And again, the ganache will set, so when you cut that, the chocolate chips will be held in the ganache on the top. So have a go, make some cakes, take some time away from the computer, and photograph and send them in so we can have a look. Thanks very much.